Good afternoon from London, where IAFOR is currently holding a joint conference on education, arts and humanities, language learning, and aging and gerontology. I'm standing here with Professor Brendan Howe. Thank you for being here, Professor.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Always good to be at an interdisciplinary conference with IAFOR.
Could you briefly introduce yourself and what it is that you do?
Sure, I'm Dean and Professor of the Graduate School of International Studies at Ewha Women's University in South Korea, which is the largest women's university in Asia. It was the largest in the world, but Saudi Arabia now has the largest women's university. But we have a tradition of groundbreaking research and education at Ewha. It was the first institution in Korea to educate women, and now the Graduate School of International Studies is the top-ranked Graduate School of International Studies in Korea. Even though it's a male-dominated discipline, the women of Ewha are leading the way.
So today is the first plenary day of the conference, and you just gave a keynote speech and a panel presentation. Let's just focus on the keynote speech first. Okay. Can you summarize briefly what you talked about?
Okay, in the keynote speech I was talking about education for refugees and the idea that it shouldn't be seen as a problem. It's not a refugee problem, it's a refugee opportunity. That through educating refugees, not only do we give benefit to the most vulnerable sections of international society, but also it's of benefit to societies themselves, because educated refugees are less likely to be a burden on society. Through educating refugees, we can empower them to contribute to national society and international society. That being said, I also looked at all the obstacles we have in educating refugees, that even if all the governments sign up to these international agreements that they will provide education for refugees, there are lots of challenges in terms of documentation, in terms of political will, in terms of actually operationalizing these initiatives. So my hope is that middle powers, normative entrepreneurs in the international system, will take the lead in providing education for refugees, not just because it's the right thing to do, but it's also the rational thing to do from the perspective of their own societies.
There's a lot of theoretical discussion packed into this.
Sure. But from the practical perspective, if we look at it, okay, why are refugees seen as a problem? They're seen as a problem because they're seen as a burden on society.
Why are they regarded as a burden? What is that burden?
I think a lot of it, I'm not sure if I certainly don't think they are a burden. I'm not sure why particularly they're seen as a burden. I think a lot of it is because of ignorance about what happens with immigrant communities, that on the whole they are very law-abiding and contribute to society. I think it's also a problem of political elites manipulating public opinion against refugees. But as I said, I don't think it really is a problem. It's more of an opportunity, especially for aging societies, that if we have educated refugees, they can contribute a great deal to society. And they can contribute in areas where the indigenous populations cannot operate or cannot operate as well. So it's not a case of zero-sum, I get some funding or I get some support or I get some education, you can't have it. It's much more a win-win situation that everyone is better off if refugees are educated. So it's not just a question of it's the right thing to do because they are human beings and all human beings have a right to education. It's the right thing to do if you are the president or prime minister of a developed country and you're facing this challenge of refugees, well, you want to turn them into a valuable resource instead. So rationally, it's a good idea.
A lot of people every day, the normal everyday life person feels alienated from their government's decisions, and they may consider them too aspirational and too out there. while the population is suffering with the rising cost of living and more everyday life issues. One may argue that they don't really care what the government is doing in terms of providing for refugees, especially because they are seen as troublemakers or taking away financial resources. So first of all, how do migrants and refugees contribute practically to the everyday life of people? And how can we convince people that it's a good idea to help migrants?
Well, first of all, statistically, migrant communities contribute more to the national economy than they take from the national economy. On average, they receive fewer benefits than the indigenous populations. Secondly, they're more law-abiding, on average, statistically. I'm not saying all of them, but on average, statistically, they're more law-abiding. So from that cold numbers perspective, it's rational to integrate them. But of course, we're not living in a world of cold numbers. People are socialized into not accepting refugees. So we need to socialize them into accepting refugees. People who are against refugees and migrants, I wonder how many of them have ever had a conversation with a refugee or migrant. And there's a very good movie came out recently, The Old Oak, I think it's called, about a pub in the north of England. Becomes the center point for conflict between two groups, the poor, unemployed northern former miners that were made redundant under Thatcher's dissolution of the coal mines, and refugee populations that were settled in the midst of this community. And we see through this movie that the socialization effects of people realizing that they have more in common, they have more to express solidarity about than contestation. And this is what we need more of. We need more understanding through engagement. The reason that refugees are rejected is because of hatred or fear. Well, hatred is generated by fear, and fear is generated by misunderstanding or lack of knowledge of the other. We fear the unknown. So what we can do is make them more known. Introduce people to people. I am a great believer in human beings. I don't think human beings are intrinsically unpleasant or bad. I think this is learned behavior, and usually behavior that's learned because of misinformation. So it's our duty, I think, as educators to correct these imbalances, and in practical ways as well, not just teaching our students, but actually arranging community-to-community interaction.
One of the things that was raised during the panel discussion was that we talk about peace education and global citizenship education and LGBTQ classes, but those people or students who go to these classes are actually the people who care and want to know more about these things.
Right.
And how can we engage those people who don't care? Even if we tell them it's beneficial for you to get into contact with migrants and you will see how beneficial it is for society, they will just wave you off and say, I don't care.
Okay, well, first of all, you told me we weren't going to talk about the panel. You said it's only going to be about the keynotes presentation. Okay, it's always going to be difficult engaging with people who don't want to be engaged. There's the problem, for instance, if you're talking about feminist perspectives in any discipline, that do you have a conference or a panel on feminist perspectives and then no one else attends? Or do you try to give increased voice within the main discourse and then risk them being drowned out, those voices being drowned out? So this is, of course, a very difficult proposition, that how do you force people to be engaged with something they say they don't want to be engaged with? So I think what you need to do in that case is go to those communities, whether they be communities of students or socioeconomic communities, and ask them what they see as their problems. And if they list refugees as being one of their problems, or migrants as being one of their problems, say, oh yeah, why? Active listening. Keep on asking them why. Oh, well, how would you justify that position then? Why do you think they're so problematic? What are the dangers they pose to you? Why do you fear them? And just engaging in discourse prepares the ground for them to be interacting with other groups. Now, it's interesting, in that panel discussion, when that question came up, there was talk, this is obviously in peace building, well, what about the warmongers? Warmongering students will not attend that class. I was teaching a class in Sydney at the Institute for International Security Studies in Sydney, and they had 2 master's programs. One master's program was, I think, conflict analysis, and the other was peace studies. And the conflict analysis, we had a lot of bombs and guns people, including a mercenary. And yet they came to the same class. It may have helped that it was a class focused on East Asia. So it wasn't focused on their specific disciplines, but it was East Asian international relations. So people from both groups came to that class. So that's a way we could do it at a student level, is have a class that would appeal to both groups and get them to integrate that way.
So we sneakily try.
Sneakily, that's right.
Include that.
Or have wine receptions or something like that where we invite both groups.
Right. Have you had talks with someone about these issues?
Yes, indeed, yeah. I've had a lot of talks throughout the day. After each time I'm put on stage, I then get followed up with a lot of questions and interrogations and comments, some positive, some negative, but it's good.
Have there been any warmongers amongst?
Yes, there are 2 realists. And realists are those that, in international relations, the realists are the real bombs and guns people that say the strong do what they want, the weak suffer what they must. I personally don't believe that's a good way to approach international relations or domestic relations. I think we need to understand why there's this perception. It's inherently pessimistic. It's self-fulfilling prophecy. If you treat everybody as an enemy, they're going to be your enemy. So you're not going to have progress unless you get out of this mindset.
Did you notice that this is exactly what you're saying, including these people into a community where other perspectives are also presented to them? Do you feel that they changed their mind a little bit?
I think the important thing, doesn't matter which side of the debate you're on, you've got to understand the other side of the debate. So if you have any form of conflict, whether it be academic conflict, whether it be physical conflict, you can have perceptions of the other. And we start from our assumptions. And our assumptions are based on data. That data may be wrong, but no one goes around suddenly saying, oh, I'm suddenly going to decide everybody whose name begins with R. Why? You would have to have some data. And so we're all rational beings. We all base our assumptions on data. So the first thing we need to do is look at non-conforming data. Data that does not support our initial assumption. Oh, well actually, I hate everyone whose name begins with R, but Robert said something nice about me the other day. Maybe that, not all data supports my assumption. So then we'd look at, after non-conforming data, we'd look at alternative explanations for the way things are that may fit the available data, including the non-conforming data, either better or at least as well. And that's how we encourage these thought processes amongst conflictual parties. So I'm not just attacking the realists. I would say the same about the liberals, social constructivists. Every different perspective needs to engage with people from other perspectives. Everyone has something to offer. The more lenses that we look through, the better picture we get.
Let's hope that everybody is willing to look at these.
Fingers crossed.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.